name's Dom Griffin. I'm a film critic, and you're watching the Armchair Auteur. It's an ongoing video series where I talk about movies, television, pop culture, and today, comic books. If you're into those kind of pop culture things and you like watching people talk about them, please consider subscribing. So, straight away, this is a bit unorthodox for the channel in that this video is not actually about movies. For me, lately, I've not been watching quite as many movies as I usually do, if only because the longer movie theaters remain closed, the longer I remain out of work, the more watching a movie reminds me that the world is on fire. So lately, in order to distract myself and stay sane, I've been reading a lot of comic books. Primarily stuff I've already read, some things I've never gotten around to reading, but I've just been in that sort of four-color world the last couple of weeks. Which is why I got kind of excited when I saw that Nando v Movies was doing this big challenge project to get as many YouTubers as possible to talk about the X-Men, one of my favorite comic book properties, one of my favorite things in the history of the world. On this channel, I've talked about the X-Men before, but today I'm going to be joining the One X-Cellent Scene challenge alongside a bunch of other very cool YouTubers. There's a whole playlist of people doing this, and the challenge is to sort of like reach in and find like one sort of perfect scene in the X-Men mythology, whether the movies, the cartoons, the video games, I guess, or the comics themselves, and just talk about them and why you think they're important. It appears that pretty much every like good scene in the X-Men movies has already been like chosen, because there's not that many of them, to be honest. I'm going to be sort of following Pat Williams' lead here and actually talking about the comics themselves. He has a really amazing video about Grant Morrison's run on X-Men, New X-Men, which is like one of my favorite X-Men comics. Was obsessed with it when it was coming out when I was in high school. But I'm going to be talking about a very recent comic, X-Men #7, the story The Crucible, written by Jonathan Hickman and drawn by Leinil. So for some background, one of the reasons it's easier for people to talk about X-Men movies than it is X-Men comic books is that X-Men comic book continuity is very complex and just riddled with strangeness and time travel and alien races and clones and all sorts of stuff. So like, X-Men comics are not very new reader friendly in general. But like every so often there's a pretty good jumping on point where even if you don't know the deep, rich, complex history of the X-Men, you can read an X-Men story and like get it and enjoy it. Currently, comic book writer Jonathan Hickman is kind of taken over this role at Marvel as being like the showrunner of the entire X line. He's sort of the godfather of the current creative direction for all the X-Men comics. X-Men, X-Force, Excalibur, what have you. Generally speaking, the current status quo of the X-Men was established last year in two interlinked miniseries called House of X and Power of 10. And these two miniseries were written by Jonathan Hickman and a variety of artists, and they worked together to sort of reset what we modern readers expect from an X-Men comic. It's very complicated, and there's a lot of like new concepts thrown in. There's a lot of craziness involving like the future, successive timelines, polyamory. So we're just gonna kind of explain the basics of what the new status quo is so that I can talk about the Crucible and this One X-Cellent Scene. So in current X-Men continuity, the X-Men and most of mutants now live on the living island of Krakoa, which is like its own sovereign nation. They're like an actual country of mutants. They have their own mutant laws. They provide these newfangled like pharmaceutical drugs to other nations to establish geopolitical power. They're like an actual real player in the world of Marvel, like Wakanda or Latveria or other countries. Part of this is about mutants actually working together as like one species, so to speak, to govern for themselves and not to just be like mutants living in America, other countries running away from humans, running away from giant robots. Like they've created a centralized position of power where they look out for themselves. It's actually caused a lot of people who are not that familiar with the X-Men or who don't really understand the X-Men on a deeper level to assume the entire storyline is about them becoming villains and being replaced by like evil doppelgangers. That's been like, finally, I think people are finally accepting that that's not the direction the story's been going in. But when it launched, tons of people, like largely people who are not from marginalized groups, were reading the book and going, oh, Xavier's a bad guy now. And really it's just because they became more militant and radicalized in actually their own survival. But the current world of the X-Men is just different. I mean, like all the villains live on the island with them now. Like Mr. Sinister just lives there. He's like a congressman in the mutant world apparently now. So for people who are not as familiar, it can be kind of weird. So I definitely suggest you read House of X and Power of 10. They're two of my favorite X-Men comics in recent memory. But the real key thing about this new status quo that is important for this specific story we're going to talk about is this new concept where the X-Men can't die. Now, I don't mean they can't be killed. I mean, like, an X-Men can die now. The mutants can be, like, murdered or destroyed or what have you. It's just that now, in the comics, there is an apparatus by which they can always be resurrected. Hickman basically created this new concept of these mutants called the Five, and it's basically 5 random X-Men characters over the last few years who by themselves might not be the most powerful or the most interesting, but he devised a way to where all of their powers, when working together, yes, even Gold Balls from Brian Michael Bendis' largely terrible X-Men run, they work together to create new bodies with replicating powers to bring mutants back to life. And then Xavier, because he keeps Cerebro in his head at all times now, it's like a cloud server for mutant memories, he can always re-download people's memories and like spirit, so to speak, back into these new bodies from the moment they died. So essentially, if the entire X-Men team gets taken down on like a suicide mission, you know, an hour or whatever later, their bodies are being regrown, their powers are reset, and then their memories are put back into them, so it's like they never died. It's a really powerful and obviously thorny idea that sort of flouts the metatextual joke of the fact that when you read X-Men comics, X-Men characters die all the time. Like, it's a really easy way, if you're telling like a mediocre X-Men story, just kill off a beloved X-Men. Every X-Men is someone's favorite, and then you have like instant pathos and people losing their minds to this tragedy. But it happens so often, and then later writers and creators will end up bringing those characters back to life, that death in the X-Men universe, so to speak, is meaningless. That's an issue with comics as a whole, superhero comics, but in the X-Men specifically, characters die and come back to life all the time. But the cool thing about this new concept, this new status quo, is that Hickman is able to tell more interesting stories, as can anyone else working in the X-Men universe now, than they could with just playing around and killing characters off like wantonly for cheap gags. It's a more interesting, more open world now that we have to play with. So, in X-Men number 7, The Crucible, we address one of the biggest issues with this new status quo. If you'll remember, if you're an X-Men person, some years ago, there's a comic book story called The House of M, where Scarlet Witch, who is a mutant, she's Magneto's daughter, has like reality-altering powers, and she basically wished away mutants. And as a result, tons of mutants lost their powers. So a huge percentage of the X-Men universe are characters who were once, you know, mutants, and now just don't have powers anymore. So in Krakoa, there's a lot of mutants who no longer have their powers, and now there's this new status quo where if they just one day up and kill themselves, they will be brought back to life with their actual powers. Now, if that were to actually happen, you would have hundreds upon thousands of mutants killing themselves every day to have to be brought back by the Five and have to be given their powers back, and that's just like a logistical nightmare for a Krakoa. Like, that's not something that like they could easily actually keep up with. So the solution to this that the Council created, which is illustrated here in the Crucible issue, is the idea that if a mutant wants to be repowered, to be made whole, so to speak, they have to undergo the Crucible, which is that the Council selects a depowered mutant. In this issue, it's Melody Guthrie, formerly Arrow, and she has to, or whoever the person is, has to fight Apocalypse in one-on-one combat. And they have to continue fighting him until Apocalypse basically decides that they have sufficiently proven, you know, like their worth and like their dedication and everything. And then he will give them a hero's death, like a warrior's death, and they get to be reborn anew. So, if this were just like a single issue story about Melody Guthrie having to prepare to fight Apocalypse to like get her powers back so she can fly in and stuff, that alone would be pretty good. That would be like a strong concept. But what makes the Crucible so special, makes this one scene so good, is it's not just about Melody Guthrie fighting Apocalypse to be made whole. There's this running commentary throughout the entire sequence with Cyclops and Nightcrawler having this ongoing philosophical discussion about the new world they find themselves in. You have Cyclops, a character who is always shown as like the truest believer in Xavier's dream, like the most sort of like loyal soldier, and then Nightcrawler is a character who is a lot more interested in like spirituality and religion and ethics and everything. And you just have the two of them going back and forth about what this all means, like whether they agree with it, what they think it means for their future, what it means for them. Like, they both have been killed and resurrected at this point. Are they themselves still? Like, what does that mean? What about if people want to be resurrected in different bodies? What if someone wants to be resurrected in their world? They say they want to come back with like Wolverine's healing ability or something. You know, is that allowed? Is that something they could actually run with? And what you discover in reading this scene and the way it plays against this dramatic, heavy, you know, ceremonial backdrop of Arrow fighting Apocalypse in Cyclops and Nightcrawler discussing things, is it's kind of Hickman as a writer talking to all of the irritating fanboys who, the minute they saw this new story development that the X-Men can't die, just started taking to Twitter and complaining about, oh, if no one can die, what does it matter? Who cares? That just makes it like cyclical comic book bullshit. He's showing them, without drawing a line in the sand and giving logical answers to all of their needling questions, that it is not so much about those questions that they have from a needling comic book nerd perspective. It's about what those questions open up within the world of the X-Men. So if a regular nerd reads this and is like, well, what does that mean if like a mutant wants to come back with like different powers than they originally had? That's just like nitpicking. That's just like complaining about a fictional story. Within the world of the X-Men, those questions have real powerful meaning in terms of identity and what it means for mutant culture, and what it means for these people now that they found a way to protect themselves from being harmed by the outside world forever. You know what I mean? Like, this addresses the fact that mutants in the world of the X-Men have had one of their own literally use reality-altering powers to take their powers away on a grand scale. And before that even happened, on Grant Morrison's run, you had Sentinels kill all of Genosha the last time they tried to live on an island together. So now it's like they've created this way within themselves to protect themselves. And that's really powerful. So all of the little questions that it now opens up, all of the complications, all the implications, those are new stories that can be told. That's a new thing you can use to explore the world of the X-Men in a way that has not been done before at this point. We've had years upon years of X-Men stories about the X-Men being feared and hated and running away from giant robots that want to kill them. Like, we've done that. Now we can burrow deeper and explore what the X-Men really means and really, really dig into the metaphor of otherness and oppression. You know, a lot of people don't fully understand that the X-Men are not like a one-to-one metaphor for like blackness or homosexuality or being trans or being Jewish or what have you. But a lot of people from those marginalized groups who've been reading this new run on the book find it speaking to them in very profound and very interesting ways and very differing ways, because the stories themselves have more complexity built into them by the way they're being told. Now you can actually talk about what it's like being a marginalized group and what that means to society and to each other without just doing the same like 6 or 7 X-Men stories we've all seen like 1,000 times. What I love about the Crucible is that this is a very simple and straightforward way to, you know, it's like a tipping point to show all the different things they're going to be able to do in the book. Like, if you read House of X and Powers of 10, like they definitely explore that stuff on a bigger scale, and there's way more weirder, over-the-top things that they tease for the future of this era of X-Men comics. But this one issue, this one scene, really concentrates all of that into like 20 pages and sets up a new emotional status quo as well. Like, this new world is so different and so interesting and so exciting and so powerful. Like, I've read The Crucible, the issue, like several times, and every time I get to the end, I kind of want to cry. Sometimes I cry, sometimes I don't, but it's very emotional, and it's because these are fictional, ridiculous science fiction concepts being tethered to real-world anxieties and real-world issues without being, like, pandering and fake. Like, there are definitely X-Men stories where they try to make things a one-to-one metaphor, and it's super awkward, super uncomfortable, and does a grand disservice to the people they're trying to show, like, homage to or whatever. But here, this really does feel like the first time in a long time that the X-Men are actually genuinely exciting. It's the first time since I was, like, in high school that I pick up X-Men comics, and I don't want to put them down, ever. And to me, that's just a lot more exciting than, like, who's going to play Wolverine in the MCU or whatever the X-Men movies have in store for us now that Disney's taken over. To me, if you love the X-Men, but you've had a difficult time finding an in to them, and you always feel like they're not quite living up to their potential, either in comics or cartoons or even movies, this new current moment of X-Men comics is really special, and it's only just started. Like, we're still very early into these stories, but this book, to me, shows that they're going to go some special places, and we should all be excited about that. So that is my take, my One X-Cellent Scene, The Crucible from X-Men #7. It's a fantastic comic. Everyone should be reading it. They're about to gear up for the first Hickman-led X-Men crossover. If you love X-Men comics, you know every year there's got to be some absurd crossover. This one is just about swords. I don't know. I'm excited. I'm very stoked to see where it goes. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you to Nando V Movies and everyone else who got involved in this challenge for even coming up with it, because it actually was a fun inspiration for me. And I hope you guys enjoyed watching it. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you did not, I'm sorry. If you like what you see and you want to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing. Hit the little bell icon so you get notifications when I put out new videos. I hope everyone is doing well. If you have differing opinions about the X-Men or other X-Men stuff you want to gush about with me in the comments, please go there. If you want to just ask me for like recommendations for X-Men stuff to read, do that too. I'm like a huge mark for that sort of thing. So thank you guys. Hope everyone's doing well. Bye.